This is Dr. James E.D. of Retina Associates and Retina Vitreous Associates in Chicagoland. I'm going to present a case today of a standard membrane peel using the pinch and peel method. This is an eye with a not terribly advanced epiretinal membrane. The vision was about 20/40, but there were significant vitreous opacities which factored into the decision to go ahead with a vitrectomy. The vitreous opacities were very bothersome to the patient and transected the visual axis. I make the infusion port approximately 3 to 3.5 millimeters posterior to the limbus. As you can see, I like to displace the conjunctiva using the point of the trocar blade prior to entering. As always, we check for proper positioning externally before turning the infusion on. Somewhat annoyingly, this eye is deviated up, and to get my 2 additional trocars in the proper positioning, I stick a Q-tip in the inferior fornix to control the eye. I want to take a second to talk about fogging of the biome or resite. You'll see here in a minute we get everything in a nice focus, and frustratingly the view fogs over. This is not from the patient breathing or from the drapes not being adherent enough to the face. This is from evaporation off the eye condensing on a comparatively colder lens. We have 2 useful tools for this problem. One is the Fred surfactant, which you see me put on the lens here. The other is to use your fingers to warm up the lens, or you can put the lens into a hot water bath, which will bring up the temperature, and you'll get much less condensation. We start by removing the large previously mentioned floaters and vitreous opacities. This is an eye that had had a couple of retinal tears that had been treated with laser many years ago. You can see the scars superiorly and temporally. After completing the core vitrectomy, we'll move on to a peripheral shave. I try to do this as efficiently as possible, staying engaged with the vitreous gel throughout, and I've got the cut rate and the aspiration turned all the way up. After completing the peripheral vitrectomy, I want to add a bit of laser to this eye. Based on the amount of laser that we had going in, I'm guessing that this eye has had multiple tears or at least large patches of lattice. So I'm going to surround everything with an additional row or 2 of laser and bring the temporal laser around inferiorly and nasally. So we've got essentially a 360 laser as I would in a retinal detachment. Again, I'll skip over the long posterior ciliary nerves. Next, onto the membrane peel. I want to get the ERM and the ILM up. I think removing the ILM completely allows the retina to relax into a more normal configuration. I do pretty much all of these cases with the 25 gauge Alcon shark skin ILM forceps. I also still like to use a silicone flat lens as opposed to the green resite lens. I think the extra magnification is useful, at least in my hands. I'm not too picky about what kind of silicone flat lens, and I'm pretty much happy with whatever. I haven't noticed big differences between them. The ERM had a faint but real edge that you could see and came off extremely easily. I like to peel the epiretinal membrane before I stain. My goal is to get the internal limiting membrane up off the entire central macula. Removing the ERM allows for a better stain of the ILM. For ICG staining, I like to keep it really simple. I dilute the ICG with 10 cc's of sterile water. I don't mess around with putting sugar or anything to weigh down the ILM dye. For a time I was using Brilliant Blue, but I've come back to ICG. I think it gets a better stain of the ILM, and I think it makes the ILM a little bit easier to peel. The way I use the ICG under fluid squirted directly at the macula and then immediately removed, I think minimizes any concerns I have over theoretical toxicity of ICG. This is a diagram of how I try to approach peeling the ILM. I want to make an initial defect in the ILM by pinching the ILM in as little retina as possible. I then want to get one of the tines of the ILM forceps underneath the ILM through that defect and extend the defect into a strip. Finally, I'll grab the distal end of that strip and try to pull the membrane around in kind of like a capsulorhexis motion. Every membrane is different, and some of them won't cooperate with this plan, and you end up taking them out piecemeal or taking the ILM off in strips. The ILM in this particular case was moderately non-compliant, and as you'll see, I had to pick at it a little bit to get a good peel. There's no tactile feedback for any of these maneuvers. Everything is visual. You have to make a grab that you think is as superficial as possible with still getting some piece of the internal limiting membrane. You then proceed slowly and watch carefully. If the underlying retina appears to be moving with the ILM, or you see distortion of the vasculature, or perhaps any bleeding, you know you've grabbed a little bit too deeply and you want to let go and regrasp. I'll next remove all the little fragments of epiretinal membrane and internal limiting membrane that we've ripped off the macular surface and are now floating in the eye. Simultaneously, we'll go ahead with a fluid air exchange. I think getting a good complete fluid air exchange is useful and important. It helps to remove any excess floaters that might be hiding, and it also gets any residual ICG dye out of the eye. I'll do one little touch up of the laser here under air. Being under air gives you a wider field view of the peripheral retina, and sometimes you can get a sense of peripheral relationships between the vitreous base that's been shaved back and the peripheral retina after you've gone to air. When I took the laser out of the eye, it took the port with it. As you can see, we no longer have the supranasal port in place, and you can also see me messing with the laser here. After using it, it incompletely retracted, which meant that when we pulled it out, it hooked the port. We're done, so this isn't an issue, but annoying.